They always said that old age is meant to be a time of comfort, a time to rest by the fire with a warm cup of tea, and reminisce about the past. They told me it would be peaceful. But that's nothing but nonsense, really. Neither in the village nor in the city is old age anything like the way it's written in those books. I had always prided myself on being strong, independent. I had 2 children, 3 grandchildren. I always felt needed until one day I didn't. I'm 75 now, and it feels like time has stopped for me. Days blend into one another, mornings and evenings are the same. The phone doesn't ring, no one visits anymore. My son John, he used to come over to spend time with me. Now it's just about the favors. The request. Mom, can you help me with this? Or I need you to sign this document. It's always something with him. A few years ago, I helped him with that big mortgage for the car he couldn't afford. Every time he calls now, that's what I hear. Mom, I need. Never. How are you? How's your health? I keep telling myself that maybe it's just a phase, maybe it's just how life goes when your children grow older and have their own families. But today something shifted. It was an ordinary morning, or I thought it would be. I was sitting by my old wooden table, the one James made for me when we first moved in here. The window was open, and I could hear the neighbors' children laughing as they ran through their yard. A soft breeze came through, but I barely felt it, too lost in my thoughts. Then my phone rang. It was John. I expected the usual, a question about the car or maybe some financial favor he needed me to help with. But this time there was something different in his voice. It was hurried, strained. Mom, he started. We've been talking and we think it's best if you move out of the house. It's too much for you now. Froze. The words barely registered. Move out. I'd spent my whole life here. Every brick in this house held a memory. I built this home, this life with James. What could he possibly mean? John, I don't understand, I said slowly. What do you mean, move out? I'm fine here. I have everything I need. But he wasn't listening. It's just not safe for you to live alone anymore, he said, and I could almost hear his wife, Jean, in the background, probably giving him that look she always does when she wants him to make decisions for me. I've found a nice place for you. You'll be taken care of, Mom. It'll be better this way. Better. It was as if he was making decisions for me without even asking. I didn't need a home with care provided. I didn't need someone else to make me feel like I wasn't capable anymore. My life wasn't for them to organize, wasn't for them to dispose of like old furniture. I didn't want to argue. I knew it would be pointless, but hearing the finality in his voice, the dismissal, made something inside me snap. No, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear the disbelief in his breathing, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. But this was my life. This was my choice. They couldn't take that from me. Mom, we've already arranged everything. John's voice cracked, and I could tell he was getting frustrated, maybe even scared. This is for your own good. That was it. My throat tightened, my chest constricted. How did things come to this? Why had it always been about helping them, supporting them, until I was nothing but an ATM for their needs? No calls to check in. No visits without an agenda. Just requests. Just favors. What happened to being family? What happened to the love that should have been unconditional? I had enough. I wasn't going to let them erase me like I was some forgotten relic. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep letting them drain me, disrespect me, and pretend it was love. I stood up from my chair, shaky but determined. I walked over to my closet and pulled out a small suitcase. My heart raced as I packed it with what I could take. I didn't know where I would go, but it was time to leave this place. Leave the life they were trying to take from me. This was my last chance. I wasn't going to wait around for them to decide my worth. I left my house that evening, suitcase in hand, and as I walked away from the only place I had ever truly called home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I never thought I'd feel like a stranger in my own home. This small dwelling, which had witnessed the birth of my 2 children and so many precious memories, no longer felt like mine. This house had been the heart of my life for decades. It was here that we celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, milestones. It had been the place where I poured all of myself into raising my children. It had been the place of love, warmth, and countless moments of joy. But now, it felt like I was merely a visitor in someone else's life. It was no longer my sanctuary. It had become a cage, a place where my memories were no longer valued, a place where the past was only useful if it served their needs. That morning, like so many others, I woke late, allowing the day to slip into the quiet comfort of routine. I wanted to prolong the moments of peace, to delay the inevitable confrontation with the reality of my situation. I had come to dread the sound of the phone ringing, knowing it would be another call from John or Jean, another reminder that I was no longer in control. They had become the architects of my future, planning what they thought was best for me, as if I no longer had a say. I sat on the worn-out sofa, the one I had chosen when we first moved here. It had been a symbol of my independence, of my ability to create a home out of nothing. But now, as I sank into its cushions, I felt a wave of emptiness wash over me. I was no longer the one who made the decisions. I was no longer the matriarch. It was as if I had become invisible in my own life. The sound of the mail slot clinking echoed through the house. I sighed, knowing what was coming. I got up slowly and walked to the front door, picking up the pile of flyers that had accumulated. There was another one from the bank, another one from a company offering specialized services for the elderly, another brochure that made my stomach turn. They all came with the same message: "You're getting old, you're not capable, you need our help." I tossed them all into the recycling bin, barely glancing at their glossy pages. They were nothing more than reminders that my life was no longer mine to control. They were for the person they wanted me to be. The old, helpless woman who needed constant care. The person they saw when they looked at me. It made me laugh bitterly. If only they knew how wrong they were. I wasn't weak. I wasn't incapable. I still had fire in me. I still had strength. But somehow they had convinced themselves otherwise. Every time John came over, I noticed the way his eyes roamed the house. It was as if he was searching for some flaw, some weakness in the fortress I had built over the years. The couch, the cushions, the bookshelves, all these things that had been a part of my life, of my family's life. They were no longer just objects to me. They were pieces of my soul, remnants of a time when my children came running to me with joy, not with requests and demands. One day, as I stood in the kitchen preparing my usual cup of tea, the phone rang. It was John. His voice was soft, almost too soft, as though he were trying to gently guide me into something I didn't want. I braced myself. "Mama," he began, his tone carefully measured, "I think it's time for you to think about moving. I found a great place for you. It's not just for older people, but it's designed for maximum comfort. Everything's included. You won't have to worry about a thing." I didn't say anything at first. His words hung in the air, cold and calculated. I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me, as though I had already been moved into that place. His tone was the final nail in the coffin, a reminder that they had already decided what was best for me without ever asking what I wanted. I put the phone down slowly, my hands trembling. A wave of coldness washed over me. Was this how it was going to end? Was this what my life had come to? I wasn't ready to let go, not of this house, not of my memories. I wasn't ready to be treated like a burden. They thought I would comply, that I would just accept their decision and move on. But they were wrong. They underestimated me. They thought I was weak because of my age, but I was far from it. If anything, I was stronger than ever. And I was done playing by their rules. I spent the next few days in a blur, my mind spinning with thoughts of how to fight back. I had to find a way to take control of my own life again, to remind them that I was still capable of making my own decisions. That this was my home, my life, and no one was going to take it from me. I began to gather my documents, sorting through the papers that proved my ownership of the house. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them push me out. I had worked too hard for this place, too hard to build a life here. I wasn't about to let them erase it all with their pity and their plans. As I signed the papers, feeling the weight of every stroke of the pen, I realized something. This wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy. It was about showing them that I wasn't some fragile old woman who could be easily discarded. I was still here, and I would fight for what was mine. When John came over next, he found the documents waiting for him. He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and frustration, but I didn't flinch. I had made my decision. There would be no turning back. This was my fight now, and I would win. He tried to argue, to reason with me, but I held firm. I had made my choice. I was no longer going to be the pawn in their game. My life, my home would remain in my hands. I would no longer be their puppet. And as I looked around my home, the place where I had raised my children, the place where I had built a life, I knew that I was ready. They had underestimated me. But I was not done yet. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of finality. It wasn't just another day. It wasn't just another moment in this quiet routine I'd been forced to accept. I felt it deep in my bones. My life as I knew it would never be the same again. For months, I'd listened to John and Jean tell me that everything they were doing was for my own good. They always positioned themselves as the ones who knew better, the ones who always had the answers. But I had been patient long enough. I had tolerated their constant overstepping, their condescending help, all while pretending to care for me. But no more. I wasn't the old woman they thought I was. I wasn't going to play along with their games anymore. I brewed my coffee, my hands steady but my mind racing. The sun was barely peeking through the curtains as I sipped the warmth, feeling the burn of caffeine soothe my nerves. I glanced at my phone, half expecting another empty, disingenuous message from John or Jean. Sure enough, there it was, another "How are you?" from them. A message sent with the same hollow tone, the same empty words, just like the ones they'd sent after they ignored me on my birthday. I had long ago stopped believing in the sincerity of their messages. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about what they could get from me. I turned the phone over, my fingers grazing the surface as I pushed it aside. I wasn't going to waste my time on their lies today. I took a deep breath and began sorting through the pile of papers on my kitchen table. I'd been putting it off for months, ever since I realized that John had started planning behind my back. Each paper I turned over revealed more of the truth I had been avoiding. There were old receipts, contracts, and documents from banks. Then, as I flicked through the papers, I came across the one that stopped me cold. A card authorizing changes to my bank accounts. I hadn't signed it. I had never agreed to anything like this. My fingers trembled as I held it in my hands. It was clear. John had already been making moves to take control, acting as though I wouldn't notice, as though I was incapable of seeing the truth. My mind raced. How could he think I wouldn't notice? How could he believe he could get away with this? I wasn't some helpless old woman, I wasn't feeble, and I certainly wasn't blind. I leaned back in my chair, letting the full weight of the situation sink in. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the house or the papers. This was about respect. About the simple fact that they had stopped seeing me as a person with a voice, with rights, with autonomy. They saw me as an obstacle. Something to be moved out of the way. But I wasn't an obstacle. I was still here, and I was still capable of standing up for myself. They didn't know who they were messing with. The phone call to my lawyer was easy enough. He had always been professional, but today, there was an edge in my voice that made him respond quickly. He scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but the mere act of calling him, of starting the legal process to reclaim what was mine, filled me with a sense of relief. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. I spent the next few hours gathering everything I needed, preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. When John and Jean came over later that day, I was ready. I stood in my kitchen, sipping my tea, watching them from the corner of my eye as they arrived, wearing their usual smug expressions, like they knew what was best for me. They were walking in with the same tired arguments, the same rehearsed lines they had used for months. "Mama, you don't understand," John said, trying his usual calm and measured tone. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of." It's time to move on. You can't keep living like this. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I looked at him, knowing exactly what he was trying to do. Trying to manipulate me to make me feel like I was a burden. But I wasn't going to let him. Not this time. John, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. I'm not moving. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house, and I decide what happens to it. I decide what happens to me. He paused, caught off guard by the firmness in my voice. He wasn't used to hearing me stand up to him. And for a moment, I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe he had expected me to crumble, to give in to his plans. But I wasn't the same woman who had always kept quiet in the past. I wasn't going to play the role of the obedient mother anymore. Mom, please. Jean chimed in, her voice cold, distant. There was no warmth, no affection in her words. It was all just manipulation, trying to guilt-trip me into agreeing. You don't know what's best for you anymore. You can't keep living like this. I shook my head slowly, the weight of her words falling away from me. I had heard it all before, the same pity, the same condescension. But it no longer mattered. Jean, I said quietly, you've been trying to control me for too long. You think you know what's best for me, but you don't. And I won't let you take away my home, my life, just because you think I'm incapable. The silence that followed was heavy. They stood there, staring at me, unable to come up with a response. Maybe they thought I would break down, give them the satisfaction of my surrender. But I wasn't going to give them that. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, John finally spoke again. His voice soft but still tinged with that familiar arrogance. Mom, we're just trying to help. This isn't going to end well for you. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I simply raised my hand, palm open, signaling that I didn't want to hear anymore. My decision had been made. There was no turning back. I turned and walked past them, heading for the door. They didn't move, didn't say anything else. I knew they weren't ready for the fight I had in me. A few hours later, I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the papers that would change my life forever. The weight of those documents, the finality of them, settled into my chest, but it was a weight I was ready to carry. I wasn't scared. I wasn't worried. I was determined. As I left the office, the world seemed different, lighter. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief, of control. This was my life, my fight, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away from me. I was ready. The sense of finality surged through me, filling every fiber of my being. There was no going back. For months, I had been playing the part of the passive, vulnerable old woman they expected me to be, the one who would meekly fade into the background of her own life. But not anymore. That woman no longer existed. I wasn't going to stay silent and invisible in their game any longer. My life was mine to control, and I had finally decided to take that control back. That morning, I woke up with a clear purpose, for the first time in many years. I had always been someone who took life one step at a time, who weathered every storm and did her best to adapt. But now, the fog of uncertainty had cleared, and I could see the path ahead. No more sitting by while John and Jean tried to manipulate me, tried to convince me that they were doing everything for my own good. They thought I was too old to understand what was happening around me. But I was far from weak. I had fought battles before, and I was prepared to do it again. This time for my freedom. I sat up in bed, stretched, and felt the weight of the years lifting off me for the first time in a long while. The house was still, but there was a hum in the air, an energy I hadn't felt in ages. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, the sound of morning life settling around me. My heart beat with a steady rhythm, like the ticking of the old clock on my wall, one that had counted the hours of my life but had never stopped. Today was the day I would make sure nothing would stop me. I grabbed my phone and made the call to my lawyer, Stephen. The one I had been working with for months, preparing for this moment. There was no turning back now. I had the evidence. I had the strength. And I had the right. We were going to take action, and we weren't going to stop until I had my life back. My future. Lucia, I know you've been waiting for this moment, Stephen said. his voice steady as always. "I'll be ready for the meeting. Just bring everything you've got. It's time." I hung up the phone with a deep breath. I could feel the weight of everything, the years of waiting, the pain of being unseen by those closest to me, lifting. It wasn't just about the documents anymore. It was about my right to exist on my own terms, to make my own choices. The minutes passed slowly as I prepared for the drive to his office. Every movement felt deliberate, filled with purpose. I wasn't just going to win back my house. I was going to take back my life. There was no room for their pity anymore, no room for their control. As I stepped outside, I felt the weight of the old house behind me. My home, the place where I had raised my children, where I had built my life from the ground up. The wooden floors creaked under my feet, echoing 1,000 memories, 1,000 moments of strength. The house had been my anchor, and now it was time for me to become its anchor, to stand firm in the face of everything they had tried to take from me. When I arrived at Stephen's office, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. The feeling of being prepared, of being armed with the right tools, was overwhelming. The moment I placed the stack of papers before him, his eyes widened slightly. He recognized the seriousness in my eyes, the determination, the fire I hadn't shown before. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to win. He quickly scanned through the documents, nodding as he saw what I had brought. "Lucia, you have a strong case," he said, his voice full of approval. "We can move forward with this. If we file these, there's no question that they'll have to answer for what they've done." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a real chance at something. Not just a chance to keep my house, but a chance to take back control of my life, my future. It was a feeling I hadn't had in years. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do this." As I left the office, papers in hand, a sense of calm settled over me. There was no going back now. I had made my decision, and I would see it through. The game had changed. They had underestimated me, but now they would see what happens when you push too far. Later that day, John called. He tried to sound calm, but I could hear the urgency in his voice. "Mama, we need to talk," he said. "Let's just sit down and figure this out. There's no reason to go to court. We can work this out peacefully." I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to placate me, trying to convince me that I didn't need to go this route. But it was too late. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them think they could manipulate me any longer. "I'm not going to negotiate, John," I replied, my voice cool and calm. "The time for that has passed. I've already prepared everything. You can't control me anymore. I'm taking back my life." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the realization dawning on him. He thought I was just a helpless old woman. He thought he could push me aside and take everything from me. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "You're making a mistake, Mama," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "You don't want to go to court. You won't be able to handle it." I laughed softly, not in mockery, but in the quiet triumph of knowing that he no longer had any power over me. "I've handled worse," I said quietly. "And I'll handle this too. Don't worry about me. Worry about your own actions." There was a finality in my words, and for the first time, I felt like I had finally broken free of their hold. I hung up the phone, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be a fight. But I was ready for it. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. I wasn't just preparing for the legal battle ahead. I was preparing for my own transformation. I had been living in the shadow of others for so long, allowing them to define me, to shape my life. But now it was time for me to take my power back. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't afraid. I had everything I needed to prove my case, and I wasn't going to let them get away with what they had done. As the hearing unfolded, I could see the shock in John's eyes as the evidence was laid bare. The documents, the forged signatures, the deceit, everything they had tried to do to control me was out in the open. They couldn't hide anymore. And they certainly couldn't hide behind their manipulations. By the time it was all over, I had won. The house, my life, my future, it was all mine again. I had taken back what was rightfully mine. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my dignity, my autonomy, my voice. John and Jean didn't know what hit them. They had tried to break me, but they had underestimated the strength that still resided in me. I wasn't just an old woman. I was a force, and they would never take my life from me again. I left for the courthouse early that morning, before the heat of the day set in. My steps were sharp, deliberate, the sound of my heels echoing in the quiet streets. This was it, my first real attempt to take back control of my life. For so long I had felt like a bystander, waiting for decisions to be made for me, always following the whims of those around me. But today, as I walked toward the old courthouse, the weight of my decision settled in with a quiet but powerful certainty. I had always imagined that real battles were fought with physical wounds, loud arguments, and frantic gestures. I thought the fight for what mattered would be a loud one. But as I stood before the heavy, creaking doors of the courthouse, I realized something that shifted everything for me. True strength didn't come from loudness. It came from the small, measured steps you took when you knew you were right. And with every step I took, my confidence grew. I wasn't just walking into a courtroom. I was walking into my future, my life. The documents in my bag felt heavy, but in a good way. They were a symbol of everything I had built, everything they had tried to take from me. The weight of those papers was the weight of years of hard work, sacrifice, and love. My fingers gripped the edges of the file tightly, pressing down as though to hold on to every ounce of everything I had endured, everything I had fought for. I had worked too hard for too long to let them erase my life. This house was my legacy, and I would not let them steal it from me, no matter how hard they tried. Every step toward that courtroom felt like I was stepping further away from the woman I had been, the one who had lived in the shadow of others. I wasn't that woman anymore. John's attempts to convince me to back down had been pathetic. I had already seen through the veneer of concern, the thinly veiled manipulation. "Mama, we're only trying to help you," he had said just the day before in that too sweet voice of his. He probably thought I would cave, that I would believe his lies. But I had heard it all before. His concern was never about me, it was about control. He wanted to keep me in my place, keep me as a tool for his and Jean's plans. But no more. I dialed Stephen, my lawyer, to confirm a few details before the hearing. His voice was calm but filled with understanding. He had been prepared for a tough battle. But I had been preparing for much longer. I was determined. "You've got everything, right?" he asked, his tone professional but encouraging. "Yes," I answered, the weight of those words more solid than any promise I had ever made. "I'm ready." When I entered the courtroom, everything seemed to slow down for a moment. I took a deep breath, my hand clutching the papers with a quiet determination. The air felt thick, the atmosphere charged with the weight of the truth about to unfold. My eyes swept over the room. John was sitting there, trying to appear calm, his posture stiff, his eyes darting from one person to the next. Jean stood by his side, but there was something in her expression that made my skin crawl, something that didn't match the words she would surely speak in support of her husband. They thought I would crumble. They thought I was too old, too weak, too frail to stand up to them. But the truth was, I had outlasted far worse in my life. I had survived far darker days. This was nothing compared to what I had already overcome. Stephen sat beside me, flipping through the documents I had gathered. As he skimmed through the papers, his eyes lit up. "Lucia, this is a solid case. If we present this properly, we've got a real chance." He nodded. There was no hesitation now, no second-guessing. I was prepared. This wasn't just about winning. This was about reclaiming my life. John's attempts to appear confident only made me more certain. I could see his unease, the way his hands fidgeted on the table, his jaw twitching slightly when the papers were presented. His eyes flicked to the lawyer sitting across from us, and I noticed how they kept looking back at him, seeking reassurance. It was clear. He was beginning to understand what I already knew. I wasn't the same woman he could easily manipulate anymore. The woman who had always quietly accepted his decisions, the one who would always put her family first, no matter the cost, was gone. The more I watched, the more I could see the cracks in his facade. The tightness around his mouth, the way his fingers trembled as he handled the documents. He was scared. He knew this time there was no escape, no easy way out. Then, of course, there was Jean. Standing beside him, her demeanor cool, composed, but her eyes. Oh, I saw them. I saw everything. She looked at me with a mixture of irritation and something colder, something calculating. She tried to look like the loving, supportive wife, but there was no warmth in her smile. Her glances at John were not just for support. They were signals, subtle but unmistakable. She wasn't just his wife. She was the architect of their plans, the mastermind behind the scenes. I wasn't blind to that. I knew what she was doing. She thought she could play me, make me believe that I wasn't capable of handling my own life. But I saw through her act. I wasn't going to fall for it. John spoke up first, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mama, this doesn't need to go to court. We can work things out. We've always tried to take care of you." I could feel the anger rising within me, but I kept my expression neutral. I wasn't going to let him see my reaction. "No, John," I said, my voice calm and firm. "You've always tried to control me, not take care of me. And I'm done being controlled." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock in their eyes, the disbelief that I was standing up for myself. The words they had been using to manipulate me, help, care, support, had lost all meaning in that moment. They were just empty words, and I wasn't buying them anymore. As the hearing went on, I watched John grow more and more uncomfortable. He kept shifting in his seat, his hands tightening around his briefcase, and I could see the sweat forming on his brow. Every time he tried to speak, I could hear the tremor in his voice. He was unraveling in front of me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. The moment the judge's gavel struck, I knew it was over. They had lost, and I had won. I could see it in John's face. He knew he had been beaten. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt light, unburdened. The years of manipulation, of silence, were behind me. I had fought back and I had won. I wasn't just reclaiming my home. I was reclaiming my voice, my independence, my life. When I returned home, it felt different. The house, my house, didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like mine again, just as it always had been. The warmth of it wrapped around me, and for the first time in so long I felt at peace. I had taken control, and nothing, not John, not Jean, not anyone, would ever take that from me again. When we started the process, I thought it would be a long battle, but it wasn't. I began to notice how my children became more and more indifferent. A week after the court hearing, John and Jean stopped visiting. They tried to hide behind the same old phrases. "Mom, it's all in your hands. You decide everything." But I saw through them. They weren't being kind. They were simply waiting for me to break, for me to back down from my plans. They wanted me to give up, to let them win. But I was ready for this. I was stubborn now. And I wasn't afraid anymore. This time I didn't hear from them at all. No calls, no visits. The silence was deafening, but it didn't bother me. When I called them, they answered sporadically, almost as if they were trying to distance themselves from me, trying to avoid the reality that I was no longer playing by their rules. And that was when I knew. I had started to act, to do what needed to be done, and there was no turning back. I sat at my desk, sifting through old documents, the familiar scent of paper and ink filling the air as I looked over the tangled web they had woven. For years, they had manipulated my property, my finances, without me even realizing. There were small things, signed bills for my house that I didn't even remember authorizing. They had been using my trust as leverage, stepping all over my boundaries, and I hadn't even noticed. They had started putting their own interests first, never thinking about how I felt or what I wanted. But that day, as I combed through those papers, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just a matter of checking my rights anymore. I had decided that I was going to take the next step. It was time to gather all the obstacles in my path and place them exactly where I wanted them. I was no longer passive in my own life. Before the sun rose, I left my house. The early morning was cool, the streets empty. I had a purpose now. I was going to the local bank. I had already known what John had been up to. He had tried to get access to my financial data. And somehow I had caught wind of it. It didn't surprise me. I'd known all along that they had been scheming. But what surprised the bank officials was how quickly I had learned about it. It was clear to me. They hadn't expected me to fight back this hard. When I arrived at the bank, I asked to speak with a representative. After a few minutes, one of the tellers came over and greeted me with a polite smile. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. I didn't have time for that anymore. I need to block any further access to my accounts, I said, my voice steady. I know my son has been making requests to review my financial records. I want to make sure everything is locked down. The bank clerk looked at me, a bit surprised by the directness in my tone, but after seeing the certainty in my eyes, he didn't hesitate. He asked for some details, and once I had provided them, he agreed to help me. I could feel the relief wash over me as the process started. For the first time in a long while, I was taking control of something that had been taken from me. Walking out of the bank, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about stopping them from accessing my finances. It was about taking back the power they had been slowly stripping away from me. I was ready to fight back, and I wasn't going to let anyone dictate how my life would go. That same evening I got a call from Stephen, my lawyer. He had some news. Lucia, I just received word that John and Jean attempted to get access to your legal documents. But don't worry, we're ahead of them. I've already prepared the necessary steps. We've got them cornered. I smiled at the sound of his voice. It was clear that we were in control now. Every step I took brought me closer to the life I had been denied for so long. I wasn't going to let them win. I had prepared too long for this moment, and I wasn't about to back down. But there was more. That same day, I received a letter from Jean. I opened it with little expectation, knowing exactly what would be inside. It was the same tired manipulation. The same empty words. Mom, you don't understand. We're only trying to protect you. We just want what's best for you. I laughed to myself as I read the letter. It was almost comical how predictable they had become. They thought I would fall for their tactics again. They thought they could continue pulling the strings, controlling me. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me any longer. The next morning I spent some time in the kitchen, reflecting on everything that had happened. The house was quiet, filled with the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of life outside. There was a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. This was a new chapter. I was no longer the woman who had lived in fear of her own children. I was taking back my life. And nothing, not even them, was going to change that. The phone rang and it was Stephen again. He was impressed by how quickly we had taken action and how thoroughly we had prepared. Lucia, I'm amazed at how quickly you've gotten everything together. We're moving forward and we're moving fast. This is going to be a tough battle, but I believe we've got this. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction as I hung up the phone. This was it. The point of no return. I was no longer simply reacting to what had been done to me. I was acting on my own terms, creating my own future. A few days later, I went back to see Stephen. This time we were finalizing everything. I walked into his office with a sense of purpose, and as I sat down, I could see the respect in his eyes. We were in this together, and he knew I wasn't going to let up. I was fighting for more than just my home. I was fighting for my dignity, my independence, my life. As we reviewed the next steps, I couldn't help but think back to how things had started. How John and Jean had thought they could manipulate me, control me, force me into a life I didn't want. They had underestimated me. And now they were going to pay the price. With every step I took, I grew more confident. I was ready for the fight ahead. I wasn't backing down. I had built my life and I was going to protect it no matter what. Every time I looked at my hands, I remembered everything they had done, everything they had given for my family. My fingers knew every stitch in my children's clothes, every curve on the old furniture we had bought together, my husband and I, many years ago. These hands had been witnesses to countless difficult decisions. But today they were ready to take the final step. It was all coming to an end. The real battle had already been fought, and now there was only one victory left: independence. And I had no intention of giving it back. That morning, when I received the letter from the court, my heart beat a little faster. This was the final part of the documents. All our claims, all these months of struggle and stress, it was coming to an end. The letter was short but clear. Claim in favor of Lucia Benson, all demands satisfied, ensure the enforcement of the decision. I sat on the couch and laughed. There were no more doubts, no more of that feeling of being on the edge of breaking. This was my victory. For the first time in years, I could feel the weight lifting from my soul. I was free to return to the life I could create on my own, without fear or interference. Couple of hours later I saw them, John and Jean. They were standing at my door trying to talk, as if nothing had happened. Again the same fake concern in their voices. They looked like they were trying to drag me back into their games, hoping I'd fall for it. But this time I was ready. I couldn't let them pull me back into the shadows. I had already moved to the other side. I met them at the door, looking them straight in the eye with calm resolve. John, as always, tried to speak first. "Mom, we're doing all of this for you, you understand?" Jean adjusted her fake concern to match the same old tune. "We just want you to be safe. This is not about money, it's about your future." I couldn't take it anymore. The look I gave them was firm, unwavering. I responded simply, "I'm no longer your concern and not your problem. My life is my decision, not yours." They stood there, frozen, not knowing how to react. I heard John mumble uncertainly, "Mom, we just want to help." And I answered, not raising my voice, but with calm certainty, "You've already made your attempt. But it's over now." I felt a sense of lightness in my chest as I closed the door behind them. They couldn't control me anymore. All the things they had tried to do to break me had crumbled into dust. They had no more hold over me. This wasn't just a legal victory. This was a victory over the shadows they had tried to cast over my life, over all the invisible chains they had tried to wrap around me, tying me to their terms. Now I was free. And this freedom meant more than any money or property ever could. I sat in my chair, gazing out the window. Outside, the wind blew the autumn leaves around, and it felt like a symbol of the change that had come. I was ready for a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I would be myself, where I would make my own decisions, where I would decide where I went and what I did. This wasn't just a story of victory. This was the story of reclaiming myself, of learning to stand on my own feet after being broken down. This was the story of how you can find strength, even when everyone around you wants to see you vulnerable. And you know what? I wasn't afraid anymore.